hire you for doing that. Because I don't know too many people who can do that.
Yeah.
That the large states and the small states tended to have. Why did that do that? So even though it may not be completely fitting into those categories, there is some truth to it if you just use large versus small. That's kind of why I chose that. So if you are a large state, let me kind of start from the bottom and work my way up. If you are a large state, would your tendency be to back the people that ended up being called Federalist, or to back the people ending up being called Democratic Republicans?
Republicans.
What?
Federalists.
Yeah, the larger states tended to be more in favor of the Federalists. The smaller states tended to be more in favor of Democrat Republicans. All right, we'll talk more about that in a second. So if that's the case, then who are the major politicians that fall under the category of Federalists?
George Washington.
Yeah.
And Alexander Hamilton.
So we got Washington, Hamilton. Give me one other name.
And Franklin.
Okay, give me one other name.
Adams.
Yeah, that's what I was looking for. Franklin is a Federalist, but he's so much the voice of reason.
So soft.
He brings everybody together. So I tend to, he wasn't one of the ones that stuck to his guns. There's no way I'll think differently. He was always open to compromise. So Democratic Republicans or Republicans, whatever word is being used. Like I said before, I like to use this because these people are not the Republicans of today and they're not the Democrats of today. They're something different than that. So using both terms kind of keeps them separate from what we think of today. So who's the major name here?
Thomas Jefferson.
Jefferson,
Madison.
John Payne.
Madison.
Payne.
Well, Payne isn't around anymore. Payne has gone to France at this point, so he can't really play in this game. He's not really, he might have been, probably would have been if he was still here, but he's playing that game over in France at this point in time. Any other names under here? Might not really be anybody that jumps to mind. John Jay might be, he kind of floats back and forth too, so I don't know that I would do that either. Probably, I don't know. Really, Jefferson and Madison at this point are the two figures that people begin to rally around. So let's not talk about Jay at this point. All right, so just kind of keeping that in mind, that now, are these two political parties?
Yeah.
Yes.
Are these two political parties?
Yeah.
No. They are not political parties. Like today, you are a registered Democrat or a registered Republican, typically. If you're going to vote in the primaries and stuff like that, you have to register. It's an official entity. These were not official entities because none of those people believed in political parties. They believed that political parties led to division and it was going to divide our nation. So we didn't need parties. And they all said that that was the way to go. They didn't want what they had back in England, which were the Whigs and the Tories or whatever else they had back there. They thought, we're all one big happy family. How long did that last?
It was short-lived.
Yeah, about 15 minutes. It didn't take long. They didn't mean to become separate political parties, but they did.
Yeah.
But it didn't happen overnight. It really kind of, even though people began to sort of ally with one group or another, as far as an actual entity defined as a political party, these were not political parties. It's at least a decade before they begin to say, okay, let's just call it what it is. At least a decade before they start actually, it's even longer than that, really, and I could show you that in terms of, if you look at how they run for president, you know how we do it today? Where you've got your Democrats and you have your Republicans, and when you choose the president, you're choosing the president and the vice president together, right? It's not the way it worked back then. people just ran, and whoever got the highest number of votes was president, whoever got the second highest number of votes was vice president, even if they were from different political philosophies.
It's not such a bad idea.
It was pretty horrible, I thought, which is what they made them realize that they needed to change it. So, but even though they all thought we could be one big happy family, it was very short-lived. They found out pretty quickly that they kind of tended to be on this side or this side. Now, there wasn't really this side. There weren't too many people that, you know, fell somewhere else. Like we have today, so many third parties. I mean, they don't ever win anything. But, you know, we have other people, the Green Party and still the Communist Party and the Socialist Party and all these different groups that run candidates, but they don't usually get very many votes, right? In this particular time period, being like the first decade of our new Constitution, these are the two major groups. But again, not political parties yet. They're not admitting that that's really what they've become. All right, so with that kind of background, let's look at the Articles of Confederation. They come into this meeting to discuss the Articles of Confederation. They all know that there's probably some issues at stake, right?
Yeah.
So what do we do with the Articles of Confederation?
Well, large government disagreed with it. They kind of wanted to get rid of it because they wanted more control over the smaller states.
What's wrong with the Articles of Confederation according to large states? What's the major problem with the Articles of Confederation?
It limits the central government.
Yeah, the central government has no real power. And the larger states want the central government to have more power. And if you're a small state, what do you want to do with the Articles of Confederation? Keep them. Why?
Because you're pretty much running yourself. You're not, I mean, you've got a little bit of say from other areas, but you're mostly kind of like before the Revolutionary War. You're just doing your own thing with very little control. You can do whatever you want.
So small states want to keep the power at the state level. They don't want to give it up to a large central government. So for the most part, the smaller states would like to hold on to the Articles of Confederation. What is another thing about the Articles of Confederation that the small states really like? Probably the major thing about the Articles, besides the fact that it gives the central government very little power.
Well, they were all equals. They weren't all like, there wasn't, everybody had an equal vote basically. So
That's
the
the
large
key.
states were by population, the small states, you know, under the article.
In the Articles of Confederation, every state had one vote. It didn't matter if you had 2 people living there or 20,000 people living there. You all got the same amount of say. So as a small state, why would you want to give that up, right? They like that definition of representation. So, Articles of Confederation is, I mean, they come together supposedly to fix or tweak it. Now, we all know that that's not what happened. Now, what does it take? I know we haven't really studied the Articles of Confederation, but did anybody pick up on this in your reading? What does it take to amend the Articles of Confederation? To make an amendment to the Articles?
Down to the 13.
Representation,
Well, how many have to vote for it?
United States,
9,
Not to amend it,
um,
that's to pass something, to pass a law, but how many have to vote to amend it?
I don't know.
Okay, unanimous.
Oh, unanimous, you mean
So-
all?
Uh-huh. So how often is that going to happen?
Never.
You ever had 5 of you in a car going to, let's go get some fast food? Where do you want to go? Wendy's. Where do you want to go? McDonald's. Where do you want to go? Taco Bell. You can't even get 5 people in a car to agree where to go to a restaurant. You're going to get 13 states to agree on changing the Articles of Confederation? It's never going to happen. What a stupid thing they did. They created a document that could never be changed. Right? I mean, for the most part, Rhode Island doesn't even come to this meeting. They don't even send anybody. How are you going to amend if you don't even have a representative from Rhode Island? So, obviously, that wasn't going to work. So, when they did start talking about changes, somebody brought up the fact, well, Rhode Island isn't even here. We really can't do anything. And somebody just said, well, let's just table that for now. We'll worry about Rhode Island later. Let's just go ahead and start talking about some of the issues. So one of the major issues is representation. So, small states, what do you want? If you do make changes in this new government, what do you want as representation?
The same as
I
it
have
is.
an idea,
Same as it was, right?
right by representation government, in government, I put representation by percent of state. I think that all states should, I don't think it's fair that the small states be outvoted by the large states just because they're size state. I think that
Well, and
that's
that's
kind
what,
of like saying that an adult could run a race and win against a child just because they're adult. That's not really fair race.
well, and that's what the small states were arguing, is that they should be able to have equal representation. But the larger states, what were they arguing?
But they like their representation status being by size because they have more members. But I think that's unfair, so I think that each state should be represented by percent of each state. Would have to.
But the question isn't about what you think is fair, it's about what they wanted back then. You're supposed to be representing the large states right now. What would the large states have argued in this situation?
Well,
And they would have argued that it should be based on population, right?
yeah.
Which
If
is,
more people living here, we're better because more people want to live here.
and they're paying more taxes,
They're
right?
paying
So,
more taxes, so they represent more.
so you guys are gonna say it should be based on population, which is a change from the Articles of Confederation. And you guys are gonna find that scary because you're afraid you're gonna lose power and then you're gonna start being dictated to by these larger states. So they want population, you guys want equal. So who won that argument?
Well,
No one was compromised.
What?
There was a compromise. No one was-
They both won. No, don't say no one, they all won. You gotta think positive here, right?
what do you mean? they all
Have you seen the news today?
So the compromise, which is referred to, it's actually called the Great Compromise. That's what it's gone down in history as being called. And the compromise is what?
Senate and House of Representatives.
So you have two houses, right? The legislature will be made up of two houses. One is the Senate, and one is the House of Representatives. And how will the membership of the Senate be determined?
Equal representation,
Equal. And what's equal mean?
2 per state.
2 per state. And how often have we changed that in history? When are you guys going to figure out I ask a lot of trick questions?
No, they-
Never. It's always been that way, and we never changed it, right? House of Representatives will be based on
Population.
population. Okay. How often has this number changed?
17.
I don't know either. Many times. Because our population has grown. When we started the House of Representatives, we started it with 65 members. Because we only had 13 states. And based on the population at the time, they came up with a formula and they came up with 65 members. How many members are there in Congress, in the House of Reps today?
It's over 300.
You guys are supposed to know this. It just breaks my heart. So in 1789, it was 65. In 2013, how many members are there in the House of
I
Representatives?
don't know.
300.
435.
Close.
Were you close? Okay, so there's 435 members of the House. And so how many members of the Senate are there today?
I don't know.
Yes, you do know, because how many states are there? 50, and if there's 2 per state, that's 100, right? Right? So there's 100 of those, and there's 435 of those.
So what about Washington, D.C.?
So how many electoral votes are there? If this is the number of senators and this is the number of congressmen, how many electoral votes are there?
535.
That would make sense, right? But that's not correct. And why is it not correct, Sean?
Because of Washington, D.C.
Which gets How many electoral votes?
3?
There you go.
Hey, awesome guy.
So there are 500, there are 538 electoral votes, even, and you know, to be honest, I don't even know how they choose their electors to make those votes. I'd have to look that up. I probably knew it at some point. But anyway, it's based on, the number of electoral votes is based on the number of people in Congress plus the 3 electoral votes for DC. All right? So that's the great compromise. Now, to us today, you look at that and you think, well, duh, that seems pretty simple. This was like one of the, I mean, keep in mind, this convention went on from May until September. And they don't have air conditioning there. And they were in a closed room with the windows shut, the shades pulled, with wigs on, in all those hot clothes that they wore back then. I don't know why they did that. I mean, it was nasty in there. It stunk. People were hot and angry and frustrated. A lot of people just left. I mean, they would get fed up and they left. So by the time they finished this whole thing, they only had 39 people left that actually signed this document. So when this came about, this was the main sticking point. When this came about, it was really like one of those, I should have had a V8 moments, you know, where they all just went, duh, of course this makes sense now. But what was the other piece of this? Because if you're going to do this, right, and this is going to be based on population, what do you then have to do?
Increase your population.
Well, what do you got to do before that? What is the population? Do you know?
Census.
You got to go count the people, right?
Yeah.
You don't even know exactly how many people you have, and therefore you don't have a formula to know how many people your particular state gets to send to Congress. Seems simple, right? You just go out and count the people. What's the problem?
They have cars. Oh, well, I'm just being honest, that's a long walk.
Okay, the logistics would be tough, I agree. But what's the other problem?
Well, who wants to count all those people? And who's gonna lie?
Who's
And
counted as a citizen
slaves.
and who's not?
Yeah, slaves.
Who's counted?
Who's a person?
Yeah.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
You say, well, just go count the people, and then somebody goes out and goes, 1, 2,
And then you have children, slaves, women.
Do I count them?
Just-
Six.
wait, what am I supposed to do with those 2, or her? Or, nobody in here looks too Indian, but if you were a Native American, what about the Indian? Do they count?
I'm Native American.
Okay, does she count? You know? So the people who were supposed to do the census now have to have a definition of a person. Kind of sad, right? And what was the definition they gave them?
For a slave, they would count them as 350.
3/5 of a person, and why? What was the rationale? Did you see it in your book?
They said it's, they cannot match the intellectual with the white people. We cannot compare them. So
Yeah,
it's-
they're not as productive as a white person.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
So it's the white guy standing on his porch and the
Floating away.
slaves working
Yeah.
in the fields, yeah. You're not as
they're only
productive.
3/5 as productive as a white person. Okay. Anyway, so blacks count. I should say slaves count. I guess we did have some free blacks, but they weren't citizens, so I don't know that they would have counted them either. That must have been a tough one too. I would think they're all 3/5. So blacks count as 3/5 of a person. Indians don't count at all. So you don't even get to count the Indians. So if you've got a bunch of Indians living in your state, that doesn't help you. So what that means is, and I said this to that group back there, but I just want to be clear that you understand this. You go out into the state, you count all the people, and let's say you've got 100,000 slaves and 200,000 whites. So how many people does your state have?
260,000.
Right, because you only get to count them as 3/5 of that. So your state has a population of 260,000. So does that mean you got to send 260,000 people to Congress? No. This is only used, you take this for every state, so you've got 13 totals, right, of population, so on and so forth. You add those all up, and this isn't the exact formula, but it's close. You add those all up, and then if this is 260,000 and the total is 1 million, that's not going to be right, then 260,000 is a certain percentage of 1 million, right? Now, they had already decided that there's only going to be 65 members in Congress. So you multiply that percentage by 65, and that's how many you get to send. So this is only to figure out your population. And then from that, you determine how many representatives you get to send to Congress. So with that being said, I'm kind of jumping to the next thing. Do you want large states?
Yes.
Do you want blacks to count
Yes.
As one.
as 3/5?
Nope.
Well, you want it to be 1, but you're not going to get 1. You're going to get 3/5. So do you want them to count or not to count?
We want them to count.
You
Small
don't want them to
states?
count because the large states are mostly in New England, where most of the population is, and they don't have slavery, so they don't have a very large black population.
Yeah. It's not, this is not a small, large state issue, really. It's a region of the country issue. And he's right. Most of your states are in the north that don't have as many slaves. But Virginia is a large state, and they have slaves. So it's going to be depending on where you are. It's not going to be based on small versus large, really. And same thing for you guys, really, to be honest. It's not truly about small versus large. It's more about, do you have a large amount of slaves? And that could be anywhere, even though what Sean said is probably correct. Most of the northern states don't have a lot of slaves. And most of the southern states that do don't have a huge white population. They have, some of them have almost as many blacks as they do whites, if not in some places even more blacks. So that's not so much an issue of large versus small. Now, obviously, even though you might count the slaves as part of your population, they're not citizens, they have no rights, and they don't get to vote or any of those kinds of things. The only benefit to this is that you're counting them so that you can hopefully increase your representation in Congress. The other thing is that if you count them, they could also possibly be taxed. I mean, taxed is like chattel. So that was one of the reasons why the North agreed to it, because the North said, well, then at least we can get some revenue from that. But that's a whole other story. All right, so let's go ahead. We're here at the convention. We have these discussions. They agree on this compromise. They write this document called the U.S. Constitution, right? Who wrote it mostly? Madison. Who is the author of the Declaration of Independence?
Right.
I heard somebody say it.
Jefferson?
Jefferson. And Madison is mostly the author of the Constitution. Now, these are important things for you to know, because both of those questions have been on shows like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? So, you know, you got to know this stuff if you want to get rich someday.
I actually watched the play in 11th grade. I didn't fall asleep. I mean, if you go to the play, the 1776 play.
Okay.
And I watched it.
So, they come up with this Constitution, right? And 39 of them sign it. They then have to leave the hot, sweaty room and take it back to their states and to try to get their states to buy into it. Now, what's the problem with what they have just done?
It's a compromise. Nobody's gonna support it.
Well-
They went in supposing, they were supposed to go in and just kind of tweak what they had, and add a few things, take away a few things, and they came out with a whole new thing. That was completely different from what they wanted.
And why is that a problem?
Because everyone from your state is thinking, expecting one thing. and
It's a
you
little
come
bit
up with
bigger
a whole new
problem than
document.
that. Because what was the Articles of
You
Confederation?
ignored states' rights, you just went in and made decisions for all the states, without the states having.
Yeah. But I'm looking for something even bigger than that. What is the Articles of Confederation?
Constitution.
It is Constitution of the United States of America. And what have they just done with it?
Pretty much like pushed it aside and said.
Ripped it up, thrown it in the garbage, and said, oh, we just decided to replace it with this other type of government. What is that called? They call that, in other countries, a coup. We overthrew the government. These 39 men went into a closed room, got all hot and sweaty, and ended up coming out with a new government. You don't get to do that. I mean, seriously, they completely overthrew the government. The Articles of Confederation, the U.S. Constitution, are two completely different governments. And then they come out with this new document, right? And they say, okay, it's going to go to the states, and we are going to ask for them to approve it. Now, who should get to approve it? When you go to the state, you just walk up to the average person on the street and say, hey, what do you think about this? I mean, there's a body there that is supposed to look at this and make a decision.
Congress.
What's that body?
Congress.
At the state level.
Government use, or is there a government? Committee of some sort?
Well, what is the committee? Each of the states at this point have it. What do we have up in Tallahassee today?
The governor.
The Florida Senate, right? Florida House of Representatives. What is that called in general?
State legislature.
It's legislature. So every state has its own legislature, right? And it has been for a long time, people have understood that that's the body within the state that makes their decisions, because who is on the legislature? How did they get there? They were voted in by their state, by the people of their state. So when you're making a decision like this, I mean, there has never been a decision like this, but when this type of thing is being considered, it goes to them. They're the legally elected body of that state to make this decision. Is that how we did it?
We just did it.
Who voted on it at the state?
Oh, you let her vote.
Hmm?
The people that could vote.
No? Was it this body? Obviously not, or I wouldn't be saying this, right? They decided to create special ratifying conventions. You ever heard of a ringer? What's a ringer?
Somebody placed to win.
Yeah.
Somebody placed to do exactly what you wanted to do.
You stack the deck to get the vote you want, right? That's how this was done.
So basically, we started the Constitution by doing the same thing that we rebelled against England for, by
Yes.
not having representation.
Now, keep in mind that probably many of the state legislators would have voted in the Constitution because they were in favor of it. It was the ones that were not in favor of it that the 39 signers were nervous about. That's why they came up with this, let's have these special ratifying conventions. And we will try to make sure that the people that are on, that get to go to that convention are stacked with people that are going to vote for the Constitution. Now, the story goes, and I can't verify this, but the story goes that they felt pretty good about most of them except for New York. And New York's a huge state at this time. And if you don't have New York, even if the other states agree, if New York holds out, you're in trouble. Because they could really cause problems for your government. The night that the convention was going to be held and the vote was going to take place, you know how they do polls ahead of time and they try to figure out if they have enough votes to make something go through? They didn't think they had it. And two of the people were, keep in mind, they walked most places. So two of the people that were going to vote against the Constitution and could have swayed the vote so that it wasn't ratified were mugged on the way to the convention and didn't get to cast their vote. So New York ratified by a very small margin.
It was two of them. Otherwise, New York and
Well, Virginia was a problem too, but they were particularly concerned about New York. And again, I can't absolutely verify that, but that's the anecdotal story behind that.
Were they named, or was it just two people?
I don't know if I remember.
I mean, I don't know if it was like a famous name that we recognize.
No, if it is, yeah, I would remember if it was somebody really famous. So anyway, my point is, the process of us getting from the Articles of Confederation to the U.S. Constitution was,
Shady.
yeah, a little shady. Obviously, the people who felt very strongly that we needed a stronger central government were more organized, probably more persuasive, probably had bigger names behind them. Because even Jefferson and Madison, who were a bit wishy-washy in terms of not wanting a strong central government, are, I mean, Madison writes the Constitution, so obviously he even thinks it needs to be a stronger central government. So most of the people that were opposed to the Constitution did not have the firepower, so to speak, as these guys. So, you know, we tend to you know, as we've talked about other things this semester, we tend to think of everything we've done in this country as being, you know, we're the leaders, you know, we're the example to the rest of the world. Well, we have our ways of, we have our backstory too, just like every other country does. Now, don't get me wrong, I mean, I personally think the U.S. Constitution is a huge improvement over the Articles of Confederation, and there's no way the Articles of Confederation could have continued and we would still be living under it today. The U.S. Constitution has that flexibility. What is one of the major changes that the U.S. Constitution brings about that wasn't in the Articles of Confederation? How many branches of government were under the Articles of Confederation?
3, legislative and judicial?
Under the Articles of Confederation?
I don't remember.
One. What was it?
The legislature.
Yeah, so it's Congress, right? So what did it not have?
Executive and judicial.
No executive, what's that mean?
President.
No president, and no what?
Judicial.
Judicial, what's that mean?
No judge system, no court system.
Right, no courts. Now, did that mean we had no judicial system? What's it mean?
It was up to the states, I think.
Right,
State.
no federal court system, no president of the federal government. Now, each state had governors and a legislature and a court system, but at the federal level, all we had was this. So what's the U.S. Constitution introduce?
All three.
All three. And why?
Balance.
What do we call that?
Power,
Checks and balances, separation of powers, those are the phrases that people use, right? Does it work?
Sometimes.
That's a good way to put it. Would you rather it only be one?
No.
Probably not. But that's why they did it, because what were they afraid of with creating a president?
to have a king.
Right back to being under a king, right? And it's interesting, I don't know if you saw this, I don't know if it's in your textbook or in my notes, but did you see what Washington wanted to be called?
Yeah.
MIT.
Yeah, what was it actually? I'm forgetting.
His high
Something,
mightiness or something.
yeah, something like very king-like, right?
King.
And, you know, people were like, oh, I don't know if that's gonna go over too well. So they just came up with Mr. President. I mean, that's pretty cool. I mean, it's respectful, but it's still just like, you're just another guy. So, anyway, I found it interesting, though, that Washington kind of took that take on it, you know, that he would, because he felt like there had to be some sense of the president being removed from the people, that they would look up to him, respect him. I don't think he wanted the powers of a king. I mean, if you really read about him, that's not the kind of person he was. But there was something about the title that made him feel like it would allow him to exude the respect and authority that he needed to have. All right, so Bill of Rights, small states.
Yeah, it was good to have Bill of Rights, and then you know who had.
Even the large states, I think, came to be like, yeah, it's a good thing for us to have. And the Bill of Rights was the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. So within 2 years of writing the Constitution, we already amended it 10 times. Which, as we've said before, we only amended it 17 times since then. So most of the, well, not most, but a large number of the amendments were done very early. Let's skip the bank for a second. This isn't really a small, large state thing, to be honest, the France and England. It becomes more of the political philosophy thing. So if you look at the list I gave you, were the Federalists more in favor of France or England? England. Which again is interesting because remember, this is Washington who wanted to be called His High Mightiness or something. And he tends to still favor England. Whereas these guys tend to favor the French. Now what happened in France, remember this is being done in 1787 to 1789. What's happening in France at the exact same time? The French Revolution, which was inspired by our revolution. So of course it seems cool that they're doing this, but what happens in France that was different than what happened here?
They started beheading people and
It got a little crazy, right? And literally they talk about there were so many heads that were cut off by the guillotine that blood flowed down streets as if it was a river. And they were killing all kinds of people. They weren't just killing the guys at the top. It really got, if you know anything about the French Revolution, they went berserk. So even the Democratic Republicans continued to support them even when it got crazy. That's kind of when these guys turned against it. Because remember, these guys are fearful of mobocracy, they're fearful of the people getting out of control, and to them, this is exactly what happened over in France. But Jefferson and Madison and the other Democratic Republicans tended to continue to support the French and kind of cut them some slack with the whole, cutting off the head thing. Bank of the U.S., again, probably not really a large, small state thing so much. Kind of depends on what the actual issues are, but probably more of this issue, right? Where does the bank fall if you're a Federalist?
they want that.
They want a bank, right?
National bank,
Because why do you need a national bank?
control and secure the U.S. money.
Yeah, you want to make sure that there's enough currency, that you control inflation rates, that you can control interest rates, and that can only be done if you have a central bank. That's their argument. And these guys say what?
No,
Why?
they don't want more U.S. or federal control over them if you leave it up to the states.
That's definitely part of it, but there's another issue here. Because the bank comes up 2 or 3 years into, after we've written the Constitution, right? And what is Jefferson's concern with the Bank of the United States? This is a pretty major issue that is going to come up in other areas that we're going to discuss over the course of the semester. So I want you to, I know it's getting late in the class, so try to stay with me here.
Jefferson thought the central bank would cause too much debt, so it would cause too much debt and worry about too much taxes. He thought that with state banks being national level, there would be fewer taxes.
Yeah, all of what you just said is true, but there's another issue that's at stake here besides just the impact that the bank would have. Who would create the bank?
There's a public money.
Too much strength for the federal government issue, wasn't it? Like,
Just in the
Jefferson
first
voted
it's
straight.
unconstitutional.
That's the key. The federal government would have to create it, and they would have to set up various regulations and rules and how much money is deposited, how much money do they hold, all of those kinds of things. But his question, Jefferson's question is, where in the Constitution does it give us the authority to have a federal bank? He doesn't see any place in the Constitution that allows him to do that. Hamilton's argument is, you're an idiot, it's right there in front of your face. Here, he pulls open the Constitution and points to where it says. What's he pointing to? What is Hamilton looking at that he says gives him the power, or gives Congress the power to create a bank?
Something to do a trade.
Well, that might be his justification in the sense of what it can do for us, but how can he actually argue that it's constitutional?
Because it was compatible with the intent.
This is, if you look you can look at this later, but if you look at Article 1 of the Constitution, Section 8, it says in there that Congress can pass any law that's necessary and proper to carry out its duties. And Hamilton says, well, of course, a bank is necessary and proper for us to be able to do what we need to do. And Jefferson's looking for the words that say, it's okay, Tommy, if you want to create a bank. And he's not finding that. So in Jefferson's mind, it's unconstitutional. In Hamilton's mind, it's clear as the nose on his face. And this is the difference between what is referred to as the loose construction approach to the Constitution or a strict construction approach. Jefferson, Madison, many others like them take the approach that if it doesn't specifically state in the Constitution that the government can do it, then they're not allowed to. And Hamilton and the Federalists tend to argue that that phrase that says necessary and proper gives them an awful lot of latitude. You guys, back in my day, we wore a lot of stuff with elastic in it. Today that's considered really nerdy, you know, unless you're a nurse or something and they wear those stretchy pants. But this is referred to as the elastic clause. Because what does elastic do? It can be expanded to just fit about anything, right? And so this is referred to as the elastic clause, that you can take that clause and pretty much say the U.S. government can do anything if you want to. And that's kind of why we ended up with two parties. Because these guys were stretching that clause. And these guys were saying, whoa, I wrote the thing. I wrote the Constitution, and that's not what I meant. And so that's where you start to get these two differences of opinion that end up emerging into two completely different political parties.
Yeah.
Which is going to be kind of the same issue with the Alien and Sedition Act and the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions, because the Federalists are going to pass those two laws because they're trying to hurt the Democratic Republicans. They're trying to limit their power and do some things that will undermine them. And Jefferson and Madison feel that they've overstepped their boundaries. They've overstepped what the U.S. Constitution allows them to do. So they come back with the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, which say, what?
We'll just leave.
That we don't even, if we don't agree with this federal law, we don't have to abide by it. And if it comes to it, we can just leave and just not be part of the United States. Did that ever come up again? Yeah, I think there was this thing called the Civil War where, you know, many of our states did just that. So it starts right here. This whole idea of states' rights, federal government, who gets to have the power, and then if the states aren't happy, what can they do? If they could just pack their bags and leave, I'm taking my toys and going home. It's kind of interesting that the guy who actually wrote the Constitution is the one who comes back and says, well, if we don't like a law, I'm being a little bit simplistic, keep in mind, but if we don't like a law that the federal government passes, we have the right to ignore it, and if necessary, we can actually leave the Union. So that is a strong statement regarding that the power needs to stay with the states. And these guys are trying to argue that the federal government should always have authority over the states. And that tension, this is 1791, 92, 93, 94, that tension still exists today. We're still struggling with that. And when I say that, struggle means it's a good thing. Because if we weren't struggling with it, we'd either have probably complete chaos or a dictatorship. It's the tension between those two things that keeps us a union. And as Sean said when he first came in today, it's interesting that what we're discussing today and all the conflict that took place back in this period, what happened in today's government? You know, I actually went online today to the U.S. Census. Did anybody happen to do anything like that today? So
I don't have time.
to print some, I wanted to print some things to show you guys today. And you know what you get when you pull that up?
What?
All of these websites are shut down because the government has shut down.
What does that technically mean?
I don't even know if I know what that means.
Basically, non-essential governing bodies, non-essential federal governing.
Yeah, but I know that they, food stamps and Medicaid and all that, that's active, but WIC isn't. Why is it just WIC? I don't know.
They just designate some things as essential.
So does it, so if you go into a store to buy something with WIC, it won't work?
That's what I heard, but I mean, like, I dropped off one of the moms at the daycare today at Walmart, and she works at Wendy's right there. And before she got out the car, I said, "Are you going to get food?" And she said, "Yeah." I said, "I suggest you go get a drink first and see if it works." And she looked at me, she's like, "What do you mean?" And I was like, "I don't know if your food stamps are gonna work." She had no idea what's going on, and I was like, so bad for people.
Yeah, I don't know, I mean, obviously, there's some things that they can't just shut down because we
Yeah.
need security and protection and all of those kinds of things.
Social security checks weren't going on either.
But I mean, just the fact that I would go to a website and the website wouldn't appear because our government is shut down, that just seems so weird to me.
I know government workers, and they're happy they're taking vacation, because they said when they go back to work, they get all their back pay.
Well,
Really?
most likely.
So it's just.
Even if they took vacation during this time?
Well, they're just treating it like a
Well, some
vacation.
of them were
Yeah, but they don't
You
know
get all
how
your
long
money
it's
back
gonna
once.
They were like,
the
well,
does
you
it.
can come and work
We
if you
pay.
want to.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, what are we gonna do? Our computer, we don't have like access to anything. And they were like, well, we can find something, but you won't get paid. And they were like, no.
I read that they have to, once the shutdown is over, they have to go back and approve whether they get that pay or not, and they usually do. And all the time this happened, they have,
Yeah.
but they can and not if they want to.
The only people that can't not show up are pretty much like our troops, and they're,
Because they're on contract with the government.
yeah, and they're gonna be
they
withheld. Some of those are gonna be withheld.
But what is the point of shutting down if you're gonna turn around and approve and pay them anyway? I mean, how did that save us any money?
Shutting down
Yeah,
when
it
you're
doesn't.
approving raises for government and Congress. Like, wouldn't we be like, wait a minute, let's use common sense here, pull back.
It is a
Go
giant issue.
Yeah.
All it is.
Well, anyway, it is interesting that the stuff that they were arguing about back in this time period, some of it really hasn't changed.
That's pretty much what it is, though, the Democrats and Republicans are not coming to an agreement. Is it a financial agreement?
Yeah, because they
Does it
have
have
to,
to do with the Obamacare?
well, they have to approve the overall budget. And
Yeah.
because of the piece that
Oh, yeah.
Obamacare has in that, and because the Republicans don't approve of that, they're using this as a way to try to,
Obamacare is part of the budget, so they're shutting off, they're not approving any of the budget.
yeah. So it's a way to try to stop Obamacare
Until they
by,
come to agreement, they'll be on shutdown.
well, it won't last long because what they know will happen is that all of us will vote all of them out of office because we're sick of this and that they're not going to risk that.
A whole lot of people are saying, I'm not voting for any of the same people next time.
Yeah. So it'll backfire if they let it go too long. If they do it to begin with, it looks like they're taking a stand, you know, and we rally behind them. But if they let it go too long, then it gets to where people don't care anymore. So. All right, guys. Have a good week. Next week is chapter 7. Oh, you have a quiz due by next Tuesday over chapters 5 and 6.
So we come back on this, right? Let go of it.
Yeah. Bring it up next class because it actually kind of applies for one of the elections. So one of the elections is coming up that we'll talk about next week. So if I don't specifically bring it up, ask me because we should discuss it a little bit.
Did we talk about why Hamilton was never elected as president? It seemed like he had such a crazy amount of power back then. And
He had
well,
too much
and
power.
Same as Franklin, like, he didn't want to become president.
Well, Franklin was, I think, too old because he was like 90 by
81.
the time most of this really got rolling.
Oh, really?
But for Hamilton, I heard the problem he had, he started having so much problem, so, and with enemies almost everywhere, so he couldn't, present himself,
Hamilton pissed everybody off, even people in his own party. So he probably should have been president if he had handled it more
Yeah.
in a more politically savvy way. He probably would have been.
Secretary of Treasury, I think was asked, he was Secretary of Treasury, right?
Yeah. And who knows, he might have exerted more power in that position than if he had been president.
That's true, I mean, you got a lot of the other roles that tend to have a whole lot of power.
Yeah.
Not even just appointed roles that have a lot of power.
Well, and especially at that time, that role, because of kind of determining our monetary policies. I mean, he was instrumental in setting up what we did in those first few decades in a monetary way. So I don't know that he would have been able to have accomplished those things. But, you know, we always tend to think, well, you're president, so you're more powerful, and you get more press and prestige, but
President would not have much power.
no, I mean, and if we all really understood that, then maybe we'd pay more attention to our congressman, you know?
Yeah, that's it. The one thing I guess that's good for all this is all this happening in the age of like of social networking and 100% 24/7 contact everybody with everybody is everybody's realizing this stuff now. Everybody's getting this information. And like, I never liked politics at all. Like, I just didn't want any part of it. I didn't know anything about it. It bored me. And then current politics infuriate me. So I like fictional politics. Like, I'm obsessed with like, the West Wing and you know, I love that show. And then like
Yeah.
House of Cards and stuff like that. Just seeing the behind the scenes and seeing the ideas of it because
Yeah.
I could see both sides of a fictional, you know, issue and go, you know, okay, this is interesting. But if I see the real thing, I'm like, oh, I'm so mad. You know, like this is real stuff we got to fix or leave alone or
Yeah.
whatever. So it's really fascinating now. But I mean, a lot more people I've known for years that had zero desire to even know about politics or anything about history are getting into it now because of it's everywhere and
Yeah.
what's in your face. I don't know how much good it's going to do. I don't know how much of it is just talking and how much is action. But
Yeah, well, I guess it can't hurt to try to get people at least somewhat more informed.
yeah, that's true.